After Grandma fell, a mixture of red and yellow fluid from the boxy skull of Wang Wenyi's wife sprayed the area all the way to the sorghum stalks beside the dike. Father watched the diminutive woman stagger backward as the bullet hit her, then toppled down the southern slope of the dike and rolled into the water. The contents of one pail of mung bean soup spilled into the ground, followed by the second, like the blood of heroes. The first pail clanked down the dike into the Blackwater River, then bobbed to the surface. It floated down past Mute, banged one or two times into a stanchion, then was picked up by the current and carried past Commander Yu, past my father, past Wang Wenyi, past Fang 6 and Fang 7. "Mom!" Father screamed, as though his guts were being ripped out as he leaped to the top of the dike. Commander Yu tried to grab him, but was too late. "Come back here!" he bellowed. Father didn't hear the command. He didn't hear anything. His skinny little frame flew along the narrow ridge of the dike, shimmering in the sun's rays. He threw down his Browning pistol, which landed amid the torn leaves of a golden bitterweed. He ran like the wind, his arms thrust out in front like wings as he ran towards Grandma. The dike was still, but dust swirled noisily. The glimmering water stopped flowing. The sorghum beyond the dike remained dignified and solemn. Father was still running along the dike. Father was a giant. Father was magnificent. Father was gorgeous. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" A single word drenched with human blood and tears, with deep familial love, with the loftiest of causes. When he reached the end of the eastern dike, he jumped over the rake barrier and scrambled up the western bank. Beneath the dike, the stony face of Mute sped by. Father threw himself down on Grandma and called out, "Mom!" one more time. She lay face down on the ground, pressed against the wild grass. The aroma of sorghum wine seeped from two exit wounds in her back. Father gripped her shoulders and rolled her over. There were no wounds on her face, which looked the same as always. Not a hair was out of place. Her fringe neatly covered her forehead. Her brows dropped slightly. Her eyes were half open. The lips on her pale face showed up bright red. Father grasped her warm hand, and called, "Mom!" yet another time. She opened her eyes wide as a smile of supreme innocence spread across her face. She reached out to him. The idling engines of the jab trucks, which had stopped at the bridgehead, revved intermittently. A tall figure appeared briefly on the dike to drag Father and Grandma down off the top. It was Mute, to his everlasting credit, before Father had a chance to get his bearings. Another gale of bullets truncated and smashed countless stalks of sorghum. The 4 trucks closed up ranks just beyond the bridge, then stopped. 8 machine guns mounted on the first and last trucks were spraying so many bullets they formed hard ribbons of crisscrossing light that spread like broken fans, sometimes to the east of the road, sometimes to the west. Sorghum stalks wailed in concert, their shattered, severed limbs drooping low or arching high into the air. Bullets raised puffs of yellow dust on the dike and produced a tattoo of muffled thuds. The soldiers on the outer slopes flattened themselves against the wild grass and black dirt, keeping perfectly still. The machine guns strafed the area for about 3 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The ground around the trucks was littered with the golden flashes of spent casings.
Hold your fire, Commander Yu ordered softly. The Japs were silent. Thin wisps of gun smoke floated above the river, carried eastward by gentle air currents. Father told me that in that moment of absolute quiet, Wang Wenyi stumbled up onto the dike, where he stood stock still, fowling piece in hand, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, the picture of great suffering. "Mother of my children!" he shrieked. Before he could take another step, dozens of machine gun shells ripped a nearly transparent crescent moon in his belly. Gut-stained bullets tore wetly through the air above Commander Yu's head. Wang Wenyi toppled off the dike and rolled into the water directly opposite the body of his wife. His heart was still beating, and there wasn't a mark on his head or face. A sense of perfect understanding flooded his mind. Father once told me that Wang Wenyi's wife had fed her 3 sons so well they grew up chubby, lively, and flourishing. One day they went out to tend the sorghum, leaving their sons behind to play in the yard. A Japanese biplane shrieked through the air above the house, making a strange growling sound as it laid a single egg, a direct hit on Wang Wenyi's yard, blowing all 3 children to bits that flew up to the eaves, were draped on the branches of trees, stained the wall. On the day Commander Yu raised the flag of resistance against the Japanese, Wang Wenyi was brought over by his wife. Gnashing his teeth with rage, Commander Yu glared down at Wang Wenyi, half of whose head lay submerged in the river. "Don't any of you move," he snarled in a low voice. Chapter 8. Scattering sorghum dances on Grandma's face, one grain landing between her slightly parted lips to rest on flawless white teeth. As he gazes at her lips, which are gradually losing their color, Father sobs, "Mom," and his tears fall on her breast. She opens her eyes amid the paly drops of sorghum, rainbows of color, as though reflected off the pearls, are embedded in her eyes. "Son," she says, "your dad, my dad, he's fighting." "He's your real dad," Grandma says. Father nods. She struggles to sit up, but the movement of her body pumps streams of blood out of the 2 holes. "Mom, I'll go get him," Father says. She waves her hand and sits up abruptly. "Doguan, my son, help your mom. Help your mom up. Let's go home. Go home." Father falls to his knees, drapes her arms around his neck, then stands up with difficulty, lifting her off the ground. Fresh blood quickly soaks his neck and assails his nose with the aroma of sorghum wine. His legs tremble under the weight of her body. He staggers into the sorghum field as bullets whiz overhead. He parts the densely packed plants, stumbling forward. His sweat and his tears merged with Grandma's fresh blood to turn his face into a demented mask. Grandma is getting heavier as the passing sorghum leaves lacerate him mercilessly. He falls. She falls on top of him. He strains to crawl out from under her, and after he lays her out on her back, she looks up, breathes a long sigh, and smiles weakly. Unfathomable mystery is embedded in that smile, an iron that burns a horseshoe brand into his memory. Grandma lies on the ground, the warmth of her breast slowly dissipating. She is dimly aware that her son is undoing her jacket, that he is covering the wound over her breast with his hand, then the wound beneath her breast. Her blood stains his hand red, then green. Her unsullied breast is stained green by her own blood, then red. Bullets have pierced her noble breast, exposing the pink honeycomb beneath it, and Father is in agony as he looks down at it. He cannot staunch the flow of blood, and as he watches it flow, he can see her face pale. Her body grows so light it might float up into the air. Grandma looks contently at father's exquisite face. She and Commander Yu had joined to crate him in the shadows of the sorghum field. Lively images of the irretrievable past streak passed her eyes like racehorses. It was raining as she sat in the bridal sedan chair, like a boat on the ocean, and was carried into Shang Tingshu's compound. The street was flooded with water, peppered by a layer of sorghum seeds. At the front door she was met by a wizened old man with a tiny queue in the shape of a kidney bean. The rain had stopped, but an occasional drop splashed onto the watery ground. Although the musicians had announced her arrival with their instruments, no one had emerged to watch the show. Grandma knew that was a bad sign. 2 men came out to help her perform her obeisances, one in his 50s, the other in his 40s. The 50-year-old was none other than Uncle Arhat Liu. The other one was one of the distillery hands. The musicians and bearers stood in the puddles like drenched chickens, somberly watching the 2 dried-up men lead my soft-limbed, rosy-cheeked grandma into the dark wedding chamber. The men exuded a pungent aroma of wine as they had been soaked in the vats. Grandma was taken up to a kang in the worship hall and told to sit on it. Since no one came up to remove her red veil, she took it off herself. A man with a facial tic sat curled up on a stool next to her. The bottom part of his flat, elongated face was red and festering. He stood up and stuck a claw-like hand out towards Grandma, who screamed in horror and reached into her bodice for the scissors. She glared intently at the man, who recoiled and curled up on the stool again. Grandma didn't set down her scissors once that night, nor did the man climb down from his stool. Early the next morning, before the man woke up, Grandma slipped down off the kang, burst through the front door, and opened the gate. Just as she was about to flee the premises, a hand reached out and grabbed her. The old man with the kidney bean queue had her by the wrist and was looking at her with hate-filled eyes. Shang Tingshu coughed dryly once or twice as his expression softened. "Child," he said, "now that you are married, you are like my own daughter. Bian Lang doesn't have what everybody says. Don't listen to their talk. We've got a good business, and Bian Lang's a good boy. Now that you're here, the home is your responsibility." Shang Tingshu held out to her a ring of bronze keys, but she didn't take them from him. Grandma sat up all the next night, scissors in hand. On the morning of the 3rd day, my maternal great-granddad led a donkey up to the house to take Grandma home. It was a northeast Gaomi Township custom for a bride to return to her parents' home 3 days after her wedding. Great-granddad spent the morning drinking with Shang Tingshu, then set out for home shortly after noon. Grandma sat side-saddle on the donkey, swaying from side to side as the animal left the village. Even though it hadn't rained for 3 days, the road was still wet, and steam rose from the sorghum in the fields. The green stalks shrouded in swirling whiteness, as though in the presence of immortals. Great-granddad's silver coins clinked and jingled in the saddlebags. He was so drunk he could barely walk, and his eyes were glassy. The donkey proceeded slowly, its long neck bobbing up and down, its tiny hooves leaving muddy imprints. Grandma had only ridden a short distance when she began to get light-headed. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair mused, and the sorghum in the fields, a full joint taller than it had been 3 days earlier, mocked her as she passed. "Dad," Grandma called out, "I don't want to go back there anymore. I'll kill myself before I go there again." "Daughter, Great-granddad replied. You have no idea how lucky you are. Your father-in-law said he's going to give me a big black mule. I'm going to sell this runty little thing. The donkey nibbled some mud-splattered grass that lined the road. Dad, Grandma sobbed, he's got leprosy. Your father-in-law is going to give me a mule. Great-granddad, drunk as a lord, kept vomiting into the weeds by the side of the road. The filth and bile set Grandma's stomach churning, and she felt nothing but loathing for him. As the donkey walked into Toad Hollow, they were met by an overpowering stench that caused its ears to droop. Grandma spotted the highwayman's bloated corpse, which was covered by a layer of emerald-colored flies. The donkey skirted the corpse, sending the flies swarming angrily into the air to form a green cloud. Great-granddad followed the donkey, his body seemingly wider than the road itself. One moment he was stumbling into the sorghum to the left of the road, the next moment he was trampling on the weeds to the right. And when he reached the corpse, he gasped, "Oh!" several times, and said through quaking lips, "Poor beggar, you poor beggar. You sleeping there?" Grandma never forgot the highwayman's pumpkin face. In that instant, when the flies swarmed into the air, she was struck by the remarkable contrast between the graceful elegance of his dead face and the mean, cowardly expression he'd worn in life. The distance between them lengthened, 1 li at a time, with the sun's rays slanting down, the sky high and clear. The donkey quickly outpaced Great-granddad, since it knew the way home. It carried Grandma at a carefree saunter. Up ahead was a bend in the road, and as the donkey negotiated the turn, Grandma tipped backward, leaving the security of the animal's back. A muscular arm swept her off and carried her into the sorghum field.